today, Bill. We got a little bit of a major announcement to make.
Yeah, big announcement. Big.
Huge
So
announcement.
yeah, we have an exclusive on our Patreon, and of course we've been promoting our Patreon a lot lately, and I would encourage everybody to go there. Just go to Patreon and search for That's Enough Out of You, and you'll see our logo. Just click on that. We encourage you to join. We have a very exciting show coming up in August where we are bringing back author David Whalen, who wrote the book Mind Games, The Assassination of John Lennon. And of course, he's been on our show several times talking about his book. And the show that we have coming up is an exclusive Q&A episode. So if you are a Patreon member, you can join anytime between now and then. You have the ability to send us a question to ask David directly. We will do that. We will record an episode with him in August, and your questions will be asked and answered in that episode. So we highly encourage you to join. You can join Patreon for as little as $1 a month. I mean, Sean, I lose $1 a month in change in my car, so we're not asking for that much. I think you can get on there and see we have a lot available. We do, of course, our weekly speakeasy episode where we talk, kind of talk about current events. It's just kind of a off the cuff conversation with Sean and I. Real quick, just a little bit about David's book, so we can kind of give if you haven't heard our episodes with David, I think we've done 3 or 4 with him. Just give a little preview of the book.
Yeah, I mean, and if you're already a Patreon member, send your questions in, message them to me. But if you're not a Patreon member, sign up for $1 a month and then get your question in. But David's book, I think it's the best book on the John Lennon assassination. I mean, it opened my eyes because remember, Bill, we both of us thought there was nothing there, that it was an open and shut case. And David has really proven that there was a lot more to it, and that Chapman couldn't have done what they said he did. And he talks about all the nefarious people connected to the religious right and to Navy intelligence and to the CIA that were around Chapman, and it's just a fascinating book. So the questions you have about the official story, about who was behind it, questions about Chapman, questions about, the Chapman in visiting Japan in 1978, the same time Lennon was there. I mean, Dave discovered that. I mean, Dave's done a tremendous job. So any questions you got on the Lennon assassination, because there was no real investigation. NYPD had their guy, and that was it. And they didn't investigate the case.
There was no investigation. There was no trial. It was a joke. So, but again, it's a Patreon exclusive event. So you need to sign up for Patreon in order to ask the question and have it answered and see the episode. So we encourage you to go to our Patreon, go to patreon.com, search for That's Enough Out of You, and you'll find us. We're the only That's Enough Out of You podcast on Patreon. So look for us.
The last thing, Bill, make sure you get the questions in early. Like start getting them now. So this way, because once we have all the questions, then we could set this up. Because right now there's no date set. It's kind of tentatively set for August, but I mean, we have to get all the questions in and then prep for it and give Dave a heads up, and then we'll go from there. So get your questions in as soon as possible.
Absolutely.
Sometimes even good people can make a mistake. And when it happens, it's one of the most intense and emotional experiences of your life. It could be a DUI, or maybe you were in the wrong place with the wrong people at the wrong time. Or perhaps you just did something stupid at the spur of the moment without even thinking, and now you're in trouble with the law. Well, you need experienced legal help right away so you don't become a victim of the criminal justice system. Even good people can make a mistake, and if you, a friend, or a loved one has been accused of a crime, don't make another mistake by hiring the wrong attorney for the kind of help you need. You need to visit toddjohnslaw.com. That's toddjohnslaw.com, and then call Attorney Todd Johns today. Attorney Todd Johns has decades of experience helping good people like you who have made mistakes or bad decisions and will stand by you every step of the way. toddjohnslaw.com.
hello and welcome to That's Enough Out of You. I am your host for this podcast. My name is Bill Rader, and joining me, as he does every week on not only this podcast, but our Patreon show called Speakeasy, it is Sean Kane. Sean, what's going on, Sean?
Billy, how you doing, buddy? I got back.
Doing good.
I survived my weekend in the Bronx. We saw the Yankees. Nathan, a little disappointed the Yankees didn't win, but his favorite player hit 2 home runs, so he's happy there, and it was a good weekend overall.
Yeah, that's good. It's definitely a warning, I would say, for the Yankees that they need to make sure that they re-sign Soto at the end of the year, because he was not playing this weekend because of injury, and they lost. So we'll see what happens. There's one more game tonight against the Dodgers, but they didn't.
I'll be watching the Celtics, Bill. You can watch that game. I'll be watching the Celtics tonight.
Yeah, I will not be watching the Celtics. I will be watching the Yankees tonight. But Sean, but before we got a great guest today. Before we get to our guests, though, just want to make sure that we are advertising once again our Patreon, because we are doing a lot on our Patreon. If you go to That's Enough Out of You on Patreon, just go to Patreon, search for That's Enough Out of You. We have an extra show that we do every week called Speakeasy, and it's a little bit different than this show. It's a little less formatted. We kind of, we just talk about whatever's on our mind, and I think our Patreons really enjoy it. And Sean, it doesn't cost a fortune. How much?
I mean, Billy, you could sign up for whatever tier you want, but as little as $1, $1, you get the videos. And the thing is, we have some big plans down the road, but we need to get more members on Patreon. So
that's it.
Please, if you can, sign up, and you're getting a lot of content for very little money.
And it's a great, I really enjoy doing those shows. Patreon's a great way to support the show. And you can also, if you can't afford the dollar or whatever, you can just join for free. We certainly have stuff on there for free members. And then for this show, you can like, subscribe, rate, review, all that stuff. Just support us and make sure that, we get the likes and everything that'll help us. So, all right, Sean, let's get going with our guest today. We are bringing back one of the panelists from our great episode a few weeks ago that we had, the great panel that we did. Greg Burnham joins us again from California. Greg, how are you?
Well, I'm doing great, and I'll be watching the Padres.
That's fine.
Yeah,
the Yankees.
The Padres who we stole Soto from.
Yeah. Well, last year was supposed to be our big breakout year, and it didn't quite happen, but we're having a better year this year with lesser expectations. So sometimes that's how things work.
Sometimes it's addition by subtraction. I've noticed that happens a lot.
Yeah.
So Greg, welcome back.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I think it's going to be it's that the panel episode was fun to do. It was a great episode, but I think it kind of limited because there were so many people trying to get their their opinions and their voices heard. But I think this will be a lot more sort of fun and get really good content out of this. So Sean, what are we talking about tonight?
Well, we're going to talk about. We really want to do a deep dive, Greg, on Vietnam, and especially Kennedy's involvement with Vietnam and how he was not going to escalate that war and how he was withdrawing the advisors. And we just want to get into that more because, like Bill said, you're kind of limited on the panel episode because there's just so many guests there, and then we're trying to get our input. But let's start with this, Greg, because I do want to get into NSAM 263 and 73 and get into the Mcgeorge Bundy. But before we do, let's talk about Vietnam itself, because the articles you have on your website, and we're going to put a link to Greg's website on the social media and on this episode when it comes out, because there's a lot of great articles there, Greg. But you talk about the Viet Cong and the Vietminh and how they were not communists, and they really didn't have a lot in common. In fact, the only thing they really did have in common was their fierce nationalistic, anti-colonialism. They just wanted to they wanted the French, they wanted the French out of their country, and they wanted the Americans, the same thing happened afterwards. And I want to talk about that. So let's start with the differences with that. And then I want to get into the creation of South Vietnam, which was basically, let's call it what it is, a CIA creation by General Ed Lansdale, in how he, migrated like what was it, over 1 million Catholic refugees, including, Diem, who would become the president, who actually came from the north, and even the Viet Cong were in the South. They started in the South. So let's get into all that, Greg, because that's very important to understand Vietnam and what was actually going on, because it wasn't a civil war and like Americans trying to liberate Vietnamese from the communists. Let's discuss that.
Well, thank you. And those are excellent questions. Because they really strike at the heart of it.
Right.
I think, kind of going way back, most people don't realize that the Vietnamese culture predates the Egyptian culture.
Wow.
That's how far back it goes. And the common thread, the common denominator, and when I say thread, I don't mean a thin piece of thread. I should probably more make it like a chain, but the thing that runs through their history as the most solid thread throughout is ancestor worship. And now my pronunciation of the religion isn't going to be correct, so I'll just leave it at ancestor worship.
Okay.
They worshiped the land, in fact, that their ancestors owned. And they buried their ancestors, obviously, on the land that they had worked. So this all goes back to the concept. I'm getting a little bit off here, so keep me on track if I go too far. I'm going to get a little bit off here. One of the things that's been lost historically, I think this is throughout the world, to be honest with you, is the connection of human beings and their lives to their labor. And there should be no disconnect between labor and life, because labor is what extends our life, right? The fact that human beings, unlike any other animal on the planet, as a result of our ability to reason, not only can we provide enough for ourselves on a daily basis, but we can provide enough for ourselves and those in our family on a daily basis. And in fact, we can then take excess, this is the first time this has happened, excess labor, and efficiently store it for future use. Now, certainly we know that there are certain animals that can do similar things, but on an extremely rudimentary level. So for instance, a bird can build a nest and store its labor there in the nest, but it's only going to last a really short period of time, and that's all instinctual. But we can go to the point where we have stock markets. We can go to the point where we can build buildings. I mean, if you build a building that lasts 45 years, right? I mean, that's an incredible feat. That's stored labor. That's your labor that's stored in the attributes of that building. So the Vietnamese, on their level of this same concept, their lives as expressed through the labor of their ancestors to develop the land, to farm the land, right? To basically worship in many ways the land. There was some pantheism going on there as well, right? This is the thing that makes them very unique and very, what's the right word? Non-aggressive, right? They were very self-contained nation, right? They didn't have any need for expansion. They weren't trying to, any of this kind of a thing. So as, time developed and things went on, we'll skip through and we'll skip past a lot of stuff here. But when you start getting up to when the French colonialism of Vietnam, this became a big problem because it was a direct assault on ancestor worship. Now, I mean, I've never heard any historian say that, but that's what it was. It was a direct assault on the very fabric of their culture.
And Greg, when you talk about their history, you're talking about going back over 2,000 years, right?
Yes. Oh, yes. Way past, possibly 10.
Okay. Wow.
Really long time. So these, this is seen as an existential threat to them on a level that goes beyond this life that we live. Say, this is a total disruption of the fabric of their culture. So when the French colonized, this was a destruction of, again, I'm using the term the labor as a generic term. This is a destruction of the labor of themselves for their whole lives, and their forebears, all of their ancestral labor was basically being destroyed, wiped out. So the initial now going back to 1954, right? Interesting things to note in 1954. Of course, we know that the French got kicked out at Bien and Few. I say this wrong all the time, so who cares? I'm just throwing the word out there. If I have it in front of me, I can say it. If I don't, sometimes I mess these things up, right? I'm not a linguist by any means. And John Kennedy, when he was in the House of Representatives, he gave an embittered speech against anything to do with the United States involvement in Vietnam. And in 1954, as a senator, he gave an even more bold speech against it in response to then Secretary of State Dulles. And Dulles' position that we should remain in Vietnam, right? So, and people, I recommend that everybody goes and reads it. I do have it on my website, but wherever you get to read it, you can read it at the JFK Library. You can get it online. It doesn't matter. But it's the speech from 1954 that John Kennedy gave to the Senate, basically, and he just goes point by point by point and makes extremely compelling arguments that we shouldn't be in here at all.
Exactly.
This wasn't a minor suggestion. This was a forceful argument and forceful debate that indicates that from a very young age, very early age. I mean, this is 9 years before his presidency in 1954, right? So he was 34 years old, right? So he has a long history. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because some people have argued. Now, we've made a lot of progress with changing this opinion over the years, but a lot of people have argued that Kennedy was responsible for Vietnam, or that Kennedy somehow wasn't good at managing the war and all this stuff, right? Well, we know today that he was against the Vietnam War for a decade and a half prior to he ever becoming president, and was very vocal about it on top of it, right?
Well, also, Greg, he had a conversation with Edmund Goulian too, about Vietnam, about the French presence there, and Goulian that the French is never going to win a guerrilla war against the Vietnamese.
Yes. And even de Gaulle warned him as well to not get bogged down in the quagmire of Vietnam. That was the word he used, was the quagmire, you know. And Kennedy said basically that you cannot defeat an enemy that is nowhere and everywhere at the same time, that has the tacit approval of the population that you're attempting to change their hearts and minds against. This is not a way of doing this, right? So I think it's an important part of history as far as the Kennedy administration goes, is to recognize that Kennedy was 100% anti-Vietnam War, dating at least 15 years prior to his presidency. And was speaking loudly about it while he was already a member of Congress. So it shouldn't be any surprise to anybody, and nobody should be under the misapprehension that Kennedy somehow, after he became president, all of a sudden became wishy-washy on his hawkish attitude towards Vietnam. And then he somehow got soft on communism. And before you know it, we've got a Marxist in the White House that needs to get murdered. I mean, this is basically, how this story kind of changes, So, so to me, that's, it's critical to recognize that. Now, it's interesting that in the same year, 1954, referring back to what you were saying, that the CIA, along with the Vatican, concocted this myth that if the northern Tonkinese Catholic population remained where they were in North Vietnam, the northern part of Vietnam, that the the communist aggressors would not let them be Catholic anymore. They would basically force them out of their religion and deprive them of religious freedom. So these are two very strong propaganda machines. Now, I'm not trying to make this a religious issue, so don't get me wrong. But we all know that a lot of religion is propaganda, no matter what your faith belief is. I think, most people, in whatever faith they are, recognizes, even though I believe in whatever religion I believe in, if a person does, there is a propaganda amount of information that does go to. And I think most people will
Sure.
admit that, and you kind of have to take things with a grain of salt and weigh it out and this and that and the other, right? So, but back then, these Catholics were fairly new. I mean, Catholicism was really new to Vietnam. But by comparison to the 10,000-year-long ancestry worship, this is a really new phenomenon. So,
Sure.
but they were devout Catholics, and they were easily influenced, apparently, or maybe not so easily. It may have taken a lot of persuasion. But the point being is that they got it done. The CIA and the Vatican got it done. And so they shipped 1,100,000 quote unquote refugees, asylum seekers, if you will, sound familiar, from North Vietnam. And if you look at a map of Vietnam and you look at the Gulf of Tonkin region, and then you look at southern Vietnam where the delta is, it's interesting to note, I've often said this, right? If, let's say there was going to be, as an example, because California is kind of this sort of semi-shaped, like, it's long, like Vietnam's long, not wide, right? So if there's going to be a civil war in California, you'd expect that it would break out somewhere around maybe Chico, California, maybe halfway up the state, north of Los Angeles, but not as far up as San Francisco, somewhere there. You wouldn't expect a civil war between Northern California and Southern California to break out, say, here in San Diego, where I live.
Yes.
See, the line of scrimmage wouldn't be here. The line of scrimmage would be far north of here. But if you look at a map of Vietnam, these northern Vietnamese Catholics were inserted. They didn't come across a land thing and hit the 17th parallel or whatever parallel it was. Is that one the 17th, or is that Korea? Don't remember. Doesn't matter. 38th parallel. So you'd think they'd hit there, but they didn't. The conflict happened in the Delta region in the south. That's where the main conflict was going on. So it's sort of indicative that there wasn't the right word, that this whole narrative is kind of a sham that we were fed, that it was pretty much a sham. And I've said this before too, that, I mean, look at this, the population of California is, almost 40 million, roughly around 40 million-ish, right? If you were to overnight, or in a short period of time, not even overnight, but a couple of years' time, if you were to remove, say, 1,100,000 Northern Californians and put them here in San Diego, it would have a tremendous impact on our economy here. It would displace jobs. It would displace people. And we're a robust state here. We're a state that, we have like one of the largest economies in the world if we were a country, right? Yet, if you displaced 1,100,000 Northern Californians and in a short period of time injected them into San Diego, it would cause an economic crisis here. And that's with modern day banking here. That's with modern day resources here. That's with all the things that we have here. It would still have a tremendously negative impact. Okay. Now, when you couple that with the fact that they were given promises, the promises they were given was there's plenty of room in South Vietnam. There's plenty of farmland for rice paddies and other things in South Vietnam. There's plenty of housing. There's plenty of employment. There's plenty of room for you. And they're going to love you when you get there. Plus, God's going to like it. Okay. So now suddenly you have the situation where these people climb on boats. Fletcher Prouty, in his book JFK, it's just JFK, but it's JFK and the plot to assassinate JFK, CIA, Vietnam, and the plot to assassinate John F. Kennedy. That book, he has a picture, I have it on my website as well, of refugees being put into these large, water vehicles to transport them. Okay. So the idea that I think is lost on most people is the tremendous effect that this influx of population to the Delta region, the impact that it had on those who already lived there.
Right.
Okay, that's what created the Viet Cong.
That's Enough Out of You is sponsored by Carfecta, Scranton's premier destination for finding the vehicle of your dreams. With a commitment to service, value, and selection, Carfecta is your trusted partner in every step of your auto purchase journey. Our sales staff will work with you to select the perfect vehicle from our diverse inventory. Our friendly office staff will assist you in securing financing and offering warranties. At Carfecta, our dedicated team is here to make your car buying experience seamless and satisfying. Located in Scranton, Pennsylvania at 220 South 7th Avenue, or call us at 272-770-0080 and check us out on Facebook. With years of experience serving the area, our dealership is dedicated to offering high-quality pre-owned vehicles to our customers. From the moment you walk through our door, we're committed to providing you with a great car buying experience. With our skilled sales staff and financing options, we'll help you get the vehicle you want at the great price you deserve. Visit Carfecta today and let us exceed your expectations. Are you thinking about selling your house? Well, Bob Connors, a realtor at Christian Saunders Real Estate, says, I can't sell your house, but I sure as heck can market it and get it from sell to sold. Call Bob today for great marketing and to get a ton of eyeballs on your house. Are you in the market to buy a home? Not sure where to start? If it looks like something you shouldn't buy, Bob's going to tell you that. Think you can't buy a house or have no idea where to start? Been there, done that. Bob will get you going in the right direction. You can reach Bob at 570-614-3624 or 570-335-9000. And you can find Bob on Facebook at Bob Connors-Realtor. Whether you call Bob or not, please remember, stay awesome, all you awesome humans, and be kind to each other. Bob Connors, the realest real estater. And thanks to Bob Connors and Christian Saunders Real Estate for sponsoring That's Enough Out of You.
The Viet Cong were not North Vietnamese. I mean, I think if you ask most Americans, now today, most people don't know a damn thing about Vietnam. But if you ask, but if you ask people even in our age group, say in the, I don't know how old you guys are, but but in the over 50, over 60 age group that were around back then, right? Over 70 age group that were around back then, most of them still don't know that the Viet Cong were not Northern Vietnamese communists.
Greg, the kids that they were sending over there had no clue about it. They didn't know where they were going. They didn't know where Vietnam was.
And Greg, that was an operation run by General Ed Lansdale. Correct.
Yes. And Dulles. I mean, Dulles had his hands right in that.
Guy, for sure.
Yeah, right.
Lansdale was Dulles' guy.
Yeah. I mean, because Lansdale had done similar things in the Philippines. He got the Magsaysay situation was, an incredible. Lansdale deserves a special place, and where, if you ask me.
Yeah, I agree.
He's somebody that had apparently no moral compass whatsoever.
And Prouty identified him in Dealey Plaza too.
Yes, and so did Krulak.
And Krulak, yes.
Krulak confirmed it,
right? And didn't one of the pictures he sent was to his wife, right? To Lansdale's wife, I believe.
I don't remember that.
I think it was. I'm almost positive it was.
Huh.
Maybe, you know what? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it was Krulak's wife. Maybe he sent it to Krulak.
Maybe.
Too. Okay.
Well, we have the letter from Krulak to Prouty, though.
Yes.
Confirming it that I mean, it wasn't even a guess. It wasn't even a. Yeah. Could that be him? Maybe that's him. It was like for sure.
Like, what is he doing there?
Yeah. What is he doing here? And it's interesting. What word do you emphasize in that? Right.
Yeah.
What was he doing there?
Yes.
Or what was he doing there?
Yes.
And my tendency is to think the second.
Yes.
What was he doing there?
Right.
Right. Because that's more important to me than what was he doing there. And what was he doing there? Yeah. He was doing something there. Lansdale doesn't pop in places, If he had just retired from CIA. Interestingly enough, he retired from CIA minutes before or minutes immediately after the assassination of Diem. That Lansdale retired from the CIA, right on the spot.
I do want to get into that tonight. I want to get into that.
Yeah.
Go more about the Viet Cong, Greg, because I want to people to really understand about the Viet Cong.
Yeah, well, so the Viet Cong, when you remove somebody from their ancestral place of worship. I mean, even for us, and we don't have ancestral places of worship here unless you're a Native American, right? But
Sure.
but in our Western culture, we don't have ancestral, worship or anything like that. So if you were to, even in our culture, though, if you were to take someone's land and leave them nowhere to have a living, to make a living for themselves, I mean, look at like John Dutton on Yellowstone, right? Yeah, right. Good luck with that. Try taking his land from him and depriving him of a way to make a living. That's not going to turn out too well, So
Right.
I think that we have to keep that in mind. And it goes even deeper for the South Vietnamese people because of the ancestor worship and the land, the tie to the land that they have. So basically, when they brought in the over 1 million quote unquote refugees, and they threw people off, now the CIA threw people off of their land in South Vietnam and allowed the North Vietnamese refugees to take it over or to split it up, or they disrupted the whole thing and tried to get these people integrated into this thing. You leave them with no choice almost than to become bandits, right? Desperation leads to banditry. If you can't feed your family, you're going to steal a loaf of bread, period.
Right.
Yep, you are. I mean, I'm going to feed my family, I'll deal with the consequences after. I'm feeding my family, So that's what was going on. And so the Viet Cong were simply South Vietnamese natives who'd been uprooted from their lives, their homes, their land, their livelihoods, and even their connection to their ancestors. Because of the way their religion works, you can't remove them from their land without removing them from their ancestral bonds.
And they were never communists.
They were never communists.
Never.
They were not communists. Okay, so they rebelled obviously against anything American at that point. So the Viet Cong did, because now there may have been a hut or village right next door to the ones that became Viet Cong, right? That didn't, because it didn't impact them as much.
Right.
You follow me? So it was a patchwork of Viet Cong that was basically an underground movement. And again, they weren't so much anti-American as they were anti-colonialism or anti messing up my life.
They were nationalists.
They were nationalists, right? Understandably, right? And the Viet Minh, on the other side of the coin, they were North Vietnamese.
Right.
They were North Vietnamese, but they were not communist by nature either. They were of the same mindset of get the hell out of Vietnam towards the French. So the French created the Viet Minh, unintended consequence, but they did.
Sure.
And the Viet Minh eventually did get a lot of communist influence into them, because they could find no other way to try to get resolution to what they were trying to do. And the Viet Cong even ended up getting aid from the North Vietnamese, that route, because they could find no way of getting Diem out of power, who was installed again by Lansdale.
Right. Exactly.
So Diem was a northern Vietnamese Catholic himself. He wasn't even from the South Vietnam, and the CIA installed him as the president of South Vietnam. So again, you're looking at the Buddhists, the large Buddhist population in South Vietnam, being completely abused by Diem, the Catholic.
Oh yeah, he was brutal.
He was brutal. He was incredibly brutal.
Yeah, the tiger cages. I mean, he was really brutal.
Yeah, he was really. He was really a mess.
The key point, Greg, you said the Viet Minh and the Viet Cong had very little in common. In fact, in your article, you say it's the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Yes.
And the only common ground was they were nationalistic and they wanted the colonialists out of their country.
Yes.
That was the key connection, and people got to understand that. And then, this whole creation of South Vietnam was a creation of the CIA by Dulles and Ed Lansdale.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say that's essentially correct. Yeah. And I think where it gets muddy is because obviously Russia and China both saw the United States, it was the Cold War back then, right? So they saw us as the enemy all the time. So it was a natural, what's the right word here? Strategy for them, again, it's almost, again, it's the enemy of my enemy is my friend mentality as well. Because they couldn't, Russia couldn't have cared less about the sovereignty of Vietnam. Neither could China. They didn't care about that. But they did care about being a thorn in the side of the United States. So they sent all kinds of equipment and all kinds of, help to both the Viet Minh, and eventually a lot of it trickled down to the Viet Cong. And mainly that was just, now it's a proxy war. Now we're in a full-blown proxy war at that point. You've got the communist versus capitalist fighting on this small piece of land, and making a mockery of what it means to be human, I guess.
So, Greg, let's get to the assassination of Diem, because there's a lot of disinformation and a lot of, Kennedy gets the blame. That a lot of people want to put that blame on Kennedy. Let's talk about that assassination and what really happened there.
So what we know is that Kennedy had been making a lot of statements that were, what's the right word? They were ambiguous, okay? When he was talking to the media, on occasion, he would be somewhat ambiguous. As an example, when he spoke to Walter Cronkite, he said it was essentially their war, it wasn't our war, etc. Right? So that's the one thing. But then we also have Kennedy making comments about how we'll never abandon Vietnam to the communists, right? So he kind of was in a political quagmire himself, because in order for him to get us out of Vietnam, he had to get reelected.
And he can't look soft on communism. And
he can't look like he's soft on communism. So that was, he had to play this kind of a political gamesmanship, in order to get this done. What was your specific question? I kind of went off track a little.
Well, I kind of lost connection there. I don't know what's going on here, but my connection, or my question, Greg, is about, I want to get into the assassination of Diem, because a lot of people want to put that blame on Kennedy, and there was fraudulent cable that was sent, a lot of shady things done by Ambassador Lodge.
Yes.
And let's talk about how the deceptive these people were to Kennedy, and that he never approved the assassination of
no.
And let's talk about what happened there, because that's very important.
Yeah. So when Kennedy wrote, so we're almost getting into the National Security Action Memorandum and the McNamara Artillery Report here a little bit. Right. Okay. So I don't know, should I start there and say what that is, and go back to this, or let me just get straight to the cable first. Okay. Get to the cable, so in National Security Action Memorandum 263, Kennedy basically says we're all personnel out of Vietnam by end of 65. First 1,000 out by the end of 63.
And you said those 1,000 did come home by Christmas, correct?
They did, yes.
Okay, that's important to understand. People then, because that means the policy of the United States government on November 22nd, 1963, was the withdrawal of Vietnam.
Yes.
Now it's going to be reversed by 273.
Correct.
That's very important for people to understand.
Yes. Yeah, it's key. It's key. And the timing is everything on these at this juncture. But within National Security Action Memorandum 263, Kennedy only approved. So I'm not going to be able to go to the cable yet without getting a little background, because I think now, a lot of your audience may already know all this. I don't know, but for those who don't know some of this background, I think I need to put a little bit of background in it.
Right.
Okay, so in September, all right, so Kennedy already knew. I mean, from before the time he became president, he knew we needed to get out of Vietnam. As we've already talked about, he's been saying it for 15 years. Nothing's changed. We have no evidence at all that ever changed. There's none, zero, zilch, none. Okay. So when he became president, we had roughly 16,000 advisors in Vietnam, military and otherwise, And I like to say that the majority of them were somehow connected to the CIA, no matter what uniform they were wearing, right?
Sure.
So,
right.
but they were ostensibly advisors, okay? So Kennedy needed to get them out, obviously, to extricate us from Vietnam. And like you alluded to earlier, the risk is appearing soft on communism coming up on an election year.
Sure.
So Kennedy decides that in order for him, he knows he's getting all kinds of pressure from the State Department, from the hawks in the military, even from Mcgeorge Bundy, his own national security advisor, people like Averell Harriman. The list is very long of people that think he should escalate in Vietnam.
Absolutely.
And the pressure is coming so hard on him to do so that it's starting to bump up to election season, to election campaigning season, and it's going to become an issue. And if in order to ensure his election, he bends to what they want, there's going to be no way out of Vietnam, as far as he can tell. So he's kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. He needs to get reelected in order to get us out of Vietnam, but he can't risk not getting elected by trying to get out of Vietnam before the election.
Right.
Okay. And the logistics is too much to get out before the election. You couldn't do it in 1 year. No way of doing it. Absolutely. So he was a little bit trapped in a spot here. So he, in my view, very smartly, but in another way of looking at it, very naively, thought that he could do an end around in order to not appear soft on communism and start the process of us getting out of Vietnam both at the same time in an election year. Right. And the way of doing it would be, in order for him, he's thinking to himself, right, who's going to call me soft on communism if I do this? Well, the American people aren't going to do it until it's spun and fed to them. Right. So who's going to call me soft on communism? Well, it's going to be the hawks in the State Department. It's going to be the hawks in the military. It's going to be all these different hawks.
And the CIA,
and the CIA,
it's in the media.
Right? Yeah. So what if I get my two top brass in the military to make a recommendation that it's going so well in Vietnam that they don't need us anymore, and therefore we can withdraw. Right. Kennedy, being a responsible leader, has decided that in his view, this is the way to go. But he's not sure. He wants to make sure that he has his ducks in a row. He wants to make sure that he has the latest information. So on September 6th, 1963, he tasks two people.
Krulak, right?
Krulak and Mendenhall. So Joseph Mendenhall was a career service officer at the State Department, foreign service officer. And we all know that General Krulak was Marine Commandant. Right. So he sends both Krulak and Mendenhall on a fact-finding mission. And this was basically under the radar. This wasn't a big televised thing. This was more under the radar. And they went and they did their fact-finding mission, came back, and the story goes, kind of funny, that when after speaking to them, Kennedy looks at both of them and said, "Did you visit the same country?" That's how different their take was. So Mendenhall, being the hawk from the State Department that he was, said that things were going terribly bad and that South Vietnam would fall overnight if we withdrew, and we need to stay and we need to fight and we need to give them everything they need, and blah, blah, blah. And Krulak had the opposite report. Krulak basically said to Kennedy what Kennedy had already himself concluded, that it's not perfect over there. It's a mess. The French left a mess, right? But we're not going to win this by doing it this way. We have to win minds and hearts and all that. So we should be able to turn over all of the functions that the U.S. military is doing there now to the Vietnamese, the government of Vietnam, by the end of 65. And we can start that process immediately. And here's a plan on how to do it, et cetera. So when Kennedy got these two reports, he basically took Krulak's, which was in line with his own. Now, anyone who knows Victor Krulak knows he's not a yes man. This is not somebody who told Kennedy what Kennedy wanted to hear. That's just not in brute Krulak's DNA. Right. That's not what he does, right? So it wasn't that, but it was a realistic look at what could be done. So Kennedy embraced that view. And now he said to himself, okay, now based on Krulak's intelligence and his knowledge of this whole situation, I want him to write up a report that we're going to put under the names of, as authors, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense McNamara, and McNamara and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Maxwell Taylor. So these are the top two brass in the military. So Kennedy rightfully thinks to himself that if I get any kind of blowback for being soft on communism, it's easily refuted because these are the two top military brass that recommended this to me.
Do you need a new roof? Are you looking to repair damage to an existing roof? Call the roofing professionals at Quality Roofing Express. Located in Scranton, Pennsylvania, Quality Roofing Express is a certified Owens Corning contractor. We are an independent, family-owned business connecting with our community and providing quality work. Our expert team can install metal roofs, rubber roofing, or traditional asphalt shingles. Do you need chimney flashing? How about a new skylight to increase your home's value and let that natural sunlight in? At Quality Roofing Express, we do it all, even siding. Check out our website, qualityroofingexpress.net, or visit us on Facebook. Give us a call at 570-614-3914 for a free estimate today. Quality Roofing Express. We put a roof over your head. DK's Corner has moved. Come see us in our brand new location at 201 Cherry Street in Jessup, Pennsylvania, right across from the Jessup Plaza. Enjoy a brand new menu with hot and cold sandwiches, soups, salads, pizza, delicious breakfast, including breakfast bowls and sandwiches, specialty coffees, and DK's famous Razzle Dazzle flavor shaken espressos, and still the best cheesesteaks around. Follow DK's Corner on Facebook and Instagram, or call them at 570-209-0278 to find out about their daily specials and catering. And DK's Corner now has beautiful outdoor seating for the summer. Don't feel like leaving the house? Call DK's Corner for delivery. And we thank DK's Corner for sponsoring That's Enough Out of You. DK's Corner, now in Jessup, Pennsylvania. That's Enough Out of You is also sponsored by Casa Quattro Winery, featuring over 20 flavors of wine, from dry red, dry white, and fruit for your sampling pleasure. Casa Quattro Winery offers entertainment, parties, and private events. Now serving a full menu with a little something for everyone, including appetizers, salads, dinners, pizza, and desserts. Casa Quattro has some of the best live entertainment in the area, with comedy and karaoke nights and live bands. Check us out on Facebook and Instagram for all of our upcoming events. And if you mention the code OUTA, that's OUTTA, you get 15% off of your order. Located on Main Street in Peckville, Pennsylvania, call 570-382-3855 for more information. And we thank Casa Quattro Winery for their support.
Okay. So now this doesn't make people happy when you do that, when you go around them like that. You know, I'm sure McNamara wasn't used to people going around him when he was president of Ford Motor Company. I'm sure that, you know, et cetera. But
Sure,
it was the way to get this done. So then Krulak and Colonel Prouty and their staffs spent nights. I mean, they didn't go home. Prouty told me they didn't go home. They spent the nights there working this long report, which was eventually called the McNamara-Taylor Trip Report. And it was so Kennedy then sent McNamara and Taylor to Vietnam to do their fact-finding mission. While they were gone, Krulak and Prouty and their staffs wrote this McNamara-Taylor report in Washington, while McNamara and Taylor are dancing around in Saigon, pretending to be doing something. Now, they thought they were doing something, I'm sure, but they weren't. So then Prouty, when the report was done, Prouty had a Air Force jet fly it to Honolulu, because most of the time when people came back from Saigon, they'd stop over in Honolulu, refuel or change planes or spend the night or whatever, and then come back to the United States. So this is on October 2nd, 63 was when NSAM 263 was written. So it's a day or two before that, when McNamara and Taylor came back. They'd land in Honolulu. This Air Force officer hands them this bound in leather report that says the McNamara-Taylor trip report on it, that they've never seen before. They certainly didn't write it, because Krulak and Prouty wrote it, right? And they were instructed, when you get back to Washington, you're to hand this to the president. It's your report, so you can discuss it with him. So I don't know what the conversation was between them on their plane trip on the way back to Washington from Honolulu, but I doubt it was a very pleasant one. So when they got back here, sure enough, Kennedy had it staged pretty well, because there were cameras and there were press and everybody, and the helicopter and the whole deal, and they come in and they sit down in the Oval Office, and there on the table is the leather-bound McNamara-Taylor report, which Prouty always points out, gee, they really didn't have any time, did they, when they were, out in the fields of Vietnam, to type this thing all up and to bind it in leather and make it look all nice and finished product and fly back and have it all done. That's not how these things do. Normally, you'd come back with all your rough notes and everything, and you'd sit down and you'd spend the time that Krulak and Prouty had spent to write the report, and then maybe you'd bind it. But they had it done when they got off the aircraft. They already had it. So, so now let's get back to NSAM 263. So when you read National Security Action Memorandum 263, it's a very short document. Most people don't realize that. There's only a couple paragraphs here. And all it says is the president has approved sections, I'll just say XYZ, of the McNamara-Taylor report, boom, and ordered the first 1,000 troops home from Vietnam, and approved a cable to be sent to lodge in Saigon. And that's all it says. So it's interesting to me, because the section of the McNamara, keep in mind, the McNamara-Taylor report is long. This isn't a short thing. It's a long thing. There's only a couple paragraphs in there that Kennedy approved.
Right.
Okay. So the rest of it is all window dressing.
Yeah.
That Krulak and Prouty wrote, right? Because it needs to appear at least like this part of it that Kennedy approved is in a context of some type. So they put it into a context, right? But the only part that's approved is this small part. It's so small, in fact, that there's no reason. Now, getting back to Mcgeorge Bundy, by the way, there's another area where his fingerprints are on stuff, right? Mcgeorge Bundy is the person who wrote NSAM 263 for Kennedy to sign. There's no reason in the world why they could not have included in NSAM 263 the two paragraphs that they refer to in this big, long report. No reason that Mcgeorge Bundy couldn't have put that there.
Sure.
Because instead of, right? Because once that's there, now you know exactly what it is that Kennedy approved. He didn't approve the whole report.
Right.
All he approved was that from the report. The withdrawal from Vietnam part is what he approved. Okay. Mm-hmm. So, so most people read NSAM 263 and they see the reference to this part of the McNamara-Taylor report. And, I'm not knocking anybody, but most people don't have either the wherewithal, the desire, the time, the diligence, whatever, to go and dig it up and look at it and see what it says.
Sure.
But it's really important what it says, because all it says is get out of Vietnam. It's really what it boiled down to, get out of Vietnam. We can let them do it now. They have the ability to do it.
Yes.
And we'll give them whatever they need,
Their
but
war.
not people. It's their war.
Not people, right.
Exactly. We'll support them, but it's their war, right? So so that's what NSAM 263 is. It's basically just a document that says we're getting out of Vietnam. Okay, now, in it, and again, I kind of blame Mcgeorge Bundy for this, there was a cable, number 534, I believe it is, to Saigon, that has a whole lot of stuff in it. I mean, right, that they were supposed to send a lot. Some of it had to do with just the logistics of all this stuff. But one item in that whole thing mentions, they're talking about how to deal with Diem, How can they get him to do the right thing? You know,
Right.
can they put pressure on this way? How can they do that way? Can they coerce him somehow? Can they, you know, help? Can they bribe? I mean, it's just all kinds of different options. And one of the things that happened to be in there was his removal, basically by assassination. Okay. There was never anything in the cable that said assassinate Diem. There was
Right.
never any order to do that. This is basically like the State Department spitballing, right? The president says this is our policy now, and we
Right.
need to do something about Diem because he's getting out of control.
He was.
Buddhist monks are immolating themselves in the street. They're setting themselves on fire. I mean,
Unbelievable.
come on,
Great.
something needs to be done. Kennedy never said kill Diem.
No.
He never suggested it. Not
Never.
at all. Okay. But when that cable went out, of all the things that were in this cable, the thing that stood out to Ambassador Lodge was, aha, we can try to figure out some way now we can get rid of Diem, which is, we have the recording of Kennedy's own dictaphone recording, basically his personal diary. And what he says on the recording after Diem was assassinated. I mean, he's audibly disturbed. He's distraught. He's really upset about it. This is not something that he wanted to have happen.
This has to stop.
And,
he said something like that, right?
Yeah. When he said that it set Lodge, it kind of freed Lodge to go along a course that he was already inclined to go in, and that the sending of the cable was a mistake, that it should never have been set on a weekend when everybody was out of town. See, I mean, there was a number of things here that happened. In other words, this was deliberately slipped in,
right?
So that then they could refer back to that one little spot and say, well, you said we could kill him. Nobody said you could kill him. You out of your minds? This is not right. That's not, so.
Greg, I just want to add, Lodge was always a political rival of Kennedy.
Yeah.
They were very, very much rivals. Kennedy put him in that position. And I think, and you can speak to this, he was planning on getting rid of Lodge, wasn't he?
I haven't researched that enough to say for certain. So I don't want to overcommit on that answer.
Fair enough.
I won't deny it, but I haven't overly studied. I haven't studied it sufficient enough to form an opinion. It is interesting, though, that the driver of the presidential limousine on November 22nd, 63, Greer, was Lodge's chauffeur.
That's interesting.
Had been his chauffeur.
Yeah.
Well, coincidence, I guess.
Yeah.
Another one. Another one. And he was driving on that day for another agent. Kennedy's regular driver had died.
Yes, that's
only a few days before him. Right, like 2 weeks before that or something, he died. So Greer wasn't even supposed to be on that trip.
And it was kind of a mysterious, a lot of mystery around the death of that.
Yes, yeah. Vince Palomara has done some work on that.
He did work on that.
Yeah. And if I'm not mistaken, Greer was, I think, 54 at the time of the shooting. Maybe even 59, but I think it was 54. I'm pretty sure. But anyway, not exactly the youthful.
Sure.
You know what I mean? You're a Secret Service agent. You need to have some speed. You need to be reacting quick. A lot of sharp 50. I'm 67. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of sharp people that are over 54. So I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that
there was other agents available.
Seems like there was other agents available that may have had a little bit more qualification for, for presidential protection, up close presidential protection. Yeah, just you'd think, you'd think. But anyway, did I cover what you had asked?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, so you can see the deception here around this whole thing with Lodge and the State Department and what they were behind his back. And then the assassination of Diem is carried out.
Yes.
And Kennedy is so upset after this happened.
Yes.
I mean, like you said, he is furious.
Yeah.
Absolutely furious.
Yeah. The reports were that when they informed him in the Oval Office, he turned white as a ghost and had to leave the room. He was so upset. He was like shocked. He was shocked because I think he knew what happened. I think Prouty's talked about this a lot too, that if you haven't heard Prouty's address at Yale University called The Anatomy of Assassination, it's on my website. It is a must listen to. This isn't something that when we get off this, first thing you should do is go to my website and listen to Anatomy of an Assassination. It's one of the best things I think I've ever heard on the subject.
Right.
But as Prouty said, the way that a leader is assassinated, and we're talking about in the 60s era, 70s era, even 50s era, right? And it may hold true today, I don't know. But back then, the whole idea is you can keep a man alive, right? If you have the resources of a secret police or a secret service or a special unit or whatever, that's their whole job is keeping the leader of the country alive, right? We know that it can be done. It's done all the time, every day, everywhere. So there are companies that are contracted by the Central Intelligence Agency that are tasked with training the secret police of many of these countries that in presidential protection or protection of the leader of the country, whoever it might be. So the ties go really deep to the agency in all these different countries where they trained the elite guard.
Yeah.
You see? So the easiest way to get an assassination there's always going to be people that want the leader of a country dead. It doesn't matter what the country is. There's always going to be, some of them are nuts. Some of them are political rivals. Some of them are anarchists, you know what I mean? But there's never going to be a shortage of people who want to kill the leader of a country. It's just human. We've seen that historically. That's just how that is. Right, wrong, and different. That's how it is. So the way that you prevent that from happening is you create a hard target, a very, very hard target, something that's impenetrable. And the easiest way to assassinate somebody, it has to come from the inside. You have to break down the elite guard's ability or willingness to protect the target.
Right. Yep.
And so that's what happened to John F. Kennedy. This wasn't a matter of and Diem as well.
Yeah.
See, this is what happened with Diem. Is the elite guard that had been trained by the Central Intelligence Agency let down their guard. And if you know the story, right? I mean, Diem and his brother, the names there, they say them backwards for us.
Sure.
I think it's the New brothers, not the Diem brothers. I have a tendency to say the Diem brothers.
I always say the Diem brothers.
The Diem brothers, but everybody knows what we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
So, and Madame New, the wife, right? They were all supposed to, Kennedy provided them with a plane the day that they fled the palace. I don't know if you knew this, but there was a plane on the tarmac waiting for them to take them out of Vietnam because they suspected that there might be a coup.
Right.
So once they had fled the palace, they went to the airport, and Prouty said to this day, well, he's been dead now for 20 years, but to the day he died, Prouty did not know what changed their mind, why they didn't just board the plane and take off.
Wow.
Somebody convinced them not to.
Did. Sure.
And for them to go back to the palace. And when they went back to the palace, of course, there was no elite guard. There was nobody to defend them. And that's how they got captured and caught. And they tried to, make their escape through, I guess, a hidden way out, and got caught and got killed.
And Greg, what if any involvement or role do you think Lansdale would have played in Diem's assassination? Because he was very close to.
Yeah. So I would think very little.
Very little, which would give him a motive if he would, believe in the stuff that Kennedy was involved, or Kennedy approved that, he would be very upset with Kennedy and blame him for that assassination. That's a possibility.
That's a possibility. There's it's interesting that so NSAM 263 was signed October 2nd. Exactly 3 weeks later, Diem is assassinated. And exactly 3 weeks later, Kennedy is assassinated. Wow. So it happened really quickly, and my hunch, my tendency is to believe that the reason for the Diem assassination was to destabilize Vietnam and try to like forced Kennedy into saying, okay, I guess I need to change my mind on this. This NSAM 263 maybe is not such a good idea. Let's pump the brakes,
Right.
not get out. Let's stabilize the situation, blah, 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 whatever. But
Which
it didn't have that.
No.
Yeah, that did not have that effect. It did not have that
That's
effect.
a great point,
Greg, can we take a couple of steps back and just
Sure.
I'm interested in what the public perception in this country was at that time around what our involvement should be in Vietnam. Did the public at large feel like we need to go there and stop what's going on, or was it hey, you know what, it's less than 20 years since World War II, it's a little over 10 years since Korea, we don't want to be involved in any more war. This is, this country is building, we're starting to really thrive and come into our own. We don't need to get involved in more war. What was the perception like?
But that is a really good question, and I don't know an exact answer. I can give you my impression.
Okay.
Just my impression. I think you make some really good points that World War II was only 18 years prior to the assassination date anyway, but I think the Red Scare, that's what I was looking for. The Red Scare narrative was pretty heavy during the Cold War and during those years, especially when you put it in the backdrop of the Berlin Wall and the backdrop of, Khrushchev and all of his shenanigans at the UN, banging his shoe on the table. I'll bury you in the dust, or whatever he said. You know what I mean? It was pretty, there was a lot of tension over that, And
then, of course, Cuba.
In Cuba, and the Bay of Pigs, and just the whole nine yards. So I think there was a mixed perception. One perception, I think, very strong would be we don't want to be in a war. But by the same token, we're sufficiently concerned with communism that we certainly don't want it to start spreading all over the place and end up in a worse situation or as bad a situation as we had in World War II. So I think that there were competing, even in individual people, you know what I mean? I don't think it was like there was some people felt this way and some people, I think that everybody kind of felt most people felt both of these tensions, that way we don't want to go into war, but at the same time.
And Kennedy probably felt the same, he probably felt them both as well, right?
Well, I think he had the same concern with communism not spreading, but I think he was really clear, like I had said earlier, for at least 15 years prior to being president, that going into Vietnam with ground troops of any kind was off the table. This is just a bad idea. You know what I mean? So I think he was more on one side of it than the average person. Do you know what I mean? Because he had a lot more information than anybody did. But he wasn't stupid. Again, the reason I think part of your question is so good is because it underscores this idea of what he felt he needed to do to get reelected.
Exactly.
Because that is where people were at. They were like, well, that's right. If we go into war, we're in this big mess. If we don't, communism, the domino effect, they were promoting the domino effect, which never happened after South Vietnam fell, which never happened, So I think that I think the majority of people, and again, I haven't taken a poll, so I don't know, but my impression is that the majority of people, I think Kennedy was a populist president more than a Democrat president, right? Because he had a lot of conservatives that voted for him as well, So I think that a lot of people trusted him. In fact, I think a lot more of them trusted him than he realized. In other words, his concern about getting reelected may have been misplaced. It may have been, he may have been overly concerned with it. I think he had the voters as individuals. He didn't have the corporations necessarily that ran the media, or he didn't have the, you know what I mean? There's a lot that he didn't have, and I think he was really concerned with the establishment turning against him.
But
the voters could have maybe pulled him through, which is why he was assassinated, in my view. By the way, it's for that reason.
It would have been a landslide in '64.
I think so too.
Yeah,
I think that was their big fear.
Yeah.
was a landslide.
Yeah.
It was the last resort. I don't think that the plotters went into this wanting to kill Kennedy. I don't think they went into it going, oh, that quote of, oh, that Kennedy, he thinks he's a king. Okay, people talk nonsense and crap like that, about people all the time. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they went into this wanting to kill him, or they hate Catholics, so they wanted to kill him. I don't buy in that either, or they hate Democrats. No, that's not that. Saying. So I don't think any of that was true. I think it was a matter of they couldn't control him.
Right.
And that was why, they weren't even convinced that they could spin things through the establishment and defeat him.
Right.
Because I don't think anybody wanted to have this mess that they created by the assassination. It was a huge mess. I mean,
Sure.
Besides, we have a reason for calling it a mess that's personal, right? Our patriotism and our belief in a better world and all these other things. But even for the plotters, who aren't concerned with that part, this is a mess. Yeah. This could not have come out the way that they had originally wanted. This wasn't clean. This isn't how an assassination happens and is clean.
Right.
We're still talking about it 65 or whatever years later, or not 65 years later, but 60 years later,
We got a little bit of a major announcement to make.
Yeah, big announcement. Big.
Huge.
So yeah, we have an exclusive on our Patreon, and of course we've been promoting our Patreon a lot lately, and I would encourage everybody to go there. Just go to Patreon and search for That's Enough Out of You, and you'll see our logo. Just click on that. We encourage you to join. We have a very exciting show coming up in August where we are bringing back author David Whalen, who wrote the book Mind Games, The Assassination of John Lennon. And of course, he's been on our show several times talking about his book. And the show that we have coming up is an exclusive Q&A episode. So if you are a Patreon member, you can join anytime between now and then. You have the ability to send us a question to ask David directly. We will do that. We will record an episode with him in August, and your questions will be asked and answered in that episode. So we highly encourage you to join. You can join Patreon for as little as $1 a month. I mean, Sean, I lose $1 a month in change in my car. So, exactly. We're not asking for that much. I think, you can get on there and see we have a lot available. We do, of course, our weekly speakeasy episode where we talk, kind of talk about current events. It's just kind of a off the cuff conversation with Sean and I. Real quick, just a little bit about David's book, so we can kind of give if you haven't heard our episodes with David, I think we've done 3 or 4 with him. Just give a little preview of the book.
Yeah, I mean, and if you're already a Patreon member, send your questions in, message them to me. But if you're not a Patreon member, sign up for $1 a month and then get your question in. But David's book, I think it's the best book on the John Lennon assassination. I mean, it opened my eyes. Because remember, Bill, we both of us thought there was nothing there, that it was an open and shut case. And David has really proven that there was a lot more to it, and that, Chapman couldn't have done what they said he did. And he talks about all the nefarious people connected to the religious right and to Navy intelligence and to the CIA that were around Chapman, and it's just a fascinating book. So the questions you have about the official story, about who was behind it, questions about Chapman, questions about, the Chapman in visiting Japan in 1978, the same time Lennon was there. I mean, Dave discovered that. I mean, Dave's done a tremendous job. So any questions you got on the Lennon assassination, because there was no real investigation. NYPD had their guy, and that was it. And they didn't investigate the case.
There was no investigation. There was no trial. It was a joke. So, but again, it's a Patreon exclusive event. So you need to sign up for Patreon in order to ask the question and have it answered and see the episode. So we encourage you to go to our Patreon, go to patreon.com, search for That's Enough Out of You, and you'll find us. We're the only That's Enough Out of You podcast on Patreon. So look for us.
The last thing, Bill, make sure you get the questions in early. Like start
Yes.
getting them now. So this way, because once we have all the questions, then we could set this up. Because right now there's no date set. It's kind of tentatively set for August, but
Yep.
I mean, we have to get all the questions in and then prep for it and give Dave a heads up and then we'll go from there. So get your questions in as soon as possible.
Absolutely.
From there, Greg, let's get into, I think this is a good time to really get into 273 because and then we could really get into McGeorge Bundy because on November 21st, Bundy's going to put this together, which would later become NSAM 273. And we talked to John Newman about this, and there was a little bit of disagreement because he talked to Bundy, and you felt that Bundy, had pre-knowledge to this, and he and John Newman didn't. And I have to at least leave that door open on Bundy because there's a lot of things on Bundy to me. One of the things is if you consider, like I do, as Alan Dulles is one of the original conspirator plotters and maybe the mastermind. I mean, Alan Dulles has a connection to McGeorge Bundy through Bill Bundy, George's brother, who was in the CIA, and he was under attack by McCarthy. And Dulles and James Angleton came to his rescue. So came to Bill Bundy's rescue. So he was kind of beholden to Dulles. And there was also a situation in correct me if I'm wrong, Greg, on the plane, and Oliver put this in the movie 91, where one person informs everybody on that plane that one person committed the assassination. And it was not a conspiracy. It was just, and this was very shortly after the assassination when the information is still coming in. And that person was McGeorge Bundy, correct?
Correct.
That to me is a suspicious. I mean, you have to leave that door open. And then we talked about who did he write 273 for? Was it for Johnson or was it for Kennedy? Because we know the implications if it's for Johnson because it was written on the 21st. So let's get into, let's do a deep dive on 273 because it was basically a full reversal of Kennedy's withdrawal policy 263. And then let's talk about Bundy.
Okay, so so what was the first part of it? I can start anywhere, but there was a first part that you said about. The first
part is about 273 is written on November 21st. So let's talk about what the
and the foreknowledge.
Right. And we'll get into the foreknowledge of what Bundy possibly knew about the assassination. But let's talk about 273 in depth. When it was written and what changed, because it was basically a full reversal and only days after Kennedy's assassinated.
So I think the key here is so after 263 was written, then 3 weeks goes by, Diem's assassinated, then 3 weeks goes by. Okay, so now in that interim, Kennedy wants the I apologize. I'm not sure who ordered this meeting, the Honolulu conference,
right?
But it was agreed upon that a bunch of the folks needed to go to Honolulu and have the Honolulu conference where they spoke about Vietnam policy. But it's important to note that Vietnam policy at that time was the result of NSAM 263, which is the central point of the whole document was withdraw from Vietnam. So it logically would follow that the Honolulu conference, because it was supposed to be talks about Vietnam, should have been talking about the logistics, the politics, etc., of withdrawing from Vietnam.
Yes.
I mean, any other conclusion is kind of ludicrous, right?
Sure.
Unless it's not. Unless what they talked about was how to undo this because they didn't agree with this, right? So you'd think you could find the minutes to the meeting of the Honolulu conference where it would show them discussing Vietnam policy. And you think they would be discussing how to withdraw, how to do it without unduly disrupting the country, how to do it in a humanitarian way. I mean, whatever. There's a lot of logistical things to talk about. Getting 16,000 people out in a short period of time, relatively short period of time, you have to talk about this.
By
But
the end of the year.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
so when you find this information about the Honolulu Conference, it's located in the Foreign Relations of the United States, FRUS, F-R-U-S, Volume 4, I guess, 1954 to 1963, I believe is the years. Anyways, there's a very small reference to the Honolulu Conference. And in the entire notation, there are only 3 small paragraphs that talk about withdrawal. Wait, that talk about Vietnam at all.
Wow.
3 small paragraphs that talk about Vietnam. And all 3 of them talk about withdrawing from Vietnam. Not, we need to change his mind. No mention. Not, withdrawal is a bad idea. No, they were talking about withdrawing. How do we withdraw? But they didn't spend much time on it for this conference going on in Honolulu. Very small amount, but it was talking about withdrawing. So that sort of confirmation that the policy at that time was withdrawing from Vietnam, even though we don't have a plethora of documentation on it, it follows logically that that's what it would be. And the State Department documents there support that. Okay. So that's the context to set this up in. Now Kennedy's going to go on a fact-finding mission in a whirlwind trip to Dallas to mend political fences. He's bringing Jackie with him. LBJ's even going to be here's the Secret Service protocol violation, big time, having both the president and the vice president in the same motorcade at the same time in a city that is known to be hostile to the president. Right? Part of the country, right? Sure, you can do that if you're in Washington, D.C., where you're controlling everything.
Right.
But you see, but again, remember we were talking about earlier how the way to assassinate somebody is you relax the protocol. Yep. You relax the protection protocol. So here's another example of it. Okay. So Kennedy's on a whirlwind trip in Dallas, and these people are in Honolulu talking about the Honolulu Conference based on NSAM 263. There's no chance that they could have had a meaningful conversation with the President of the United States. After all, we have his daily schedule. We know what he did that day. We know how busy it was. Come on, presidents don't get a break, right? So for him to make a complete reversal of his policy that he had just set in motion 6 weeks ago as a result of the discussions they had at a conference that he hasn't even been able to see what they discussed yet.
Get debriefed on,
He wasn't debriefed on this, right? And we know what they discussed because we have it now, and it's hardly anything, right? So how in the world did the Honolulu Conference spawn the draft of the document that reversed the withdrawal policy, NSAM 273? How did NSAM 273 get spawned from the Honolulu Conference? We need to know that, because that's supposedly where it came from. But there's no record of them discussing, we think Kennedy got this wrong and we're going to have to talk him out of it. There's none of that. There's just this sort of assumption in the draft of NSAM 273 that we've discussed this and we've prepared this thing for the president to sign, and that's what we've done. And sure enough, quote unquote, he does sign it, except he doesn't. His successor does, because they blow his brains out in the interim. In between. So on November 21st, the day before the assassination, and we know it was late in the evening, is when Mcgeorge Bundy signed the draft of NSAM 273, which states in part that it is the central policy of the U.S. government to help defend Vietnam, or something to that effect. I have it here, but you get the drift. I don't need to read the exact thing, right? But basically, they're saying the central object of the government as regards to Vietnam is for us to basically stay and help defend them, which was not what it was. And the reason it wasn't, it couldn't have been, right? It couldn't have been, because the day before Kennedy was still alive, and the day this was written, Kennedy was still alive. So somebody knew something. How could they have reversed this when Kennedy was alive, not knowing that he was going to be dead the next day? That just it just begs.
Well, what John Newman said is that when he talked to Bundy, he had the original version of
Yeah, I heard that too.
273, and then he said that the final paragraph, or it was a paragraph 7, where actually how are we going to assist the South Vietnam was actually changed. And what Newman says is the original version, if you're a war planner, you're very limited. You can't do anything to combat troops. All you could do is give assistance, not even advisory assistance, just basically economic assistance to the resistance. But then the change in the paragraph that he says that Bundy did on Johnson's orders. If you're a war planner and you look at that, you could basically do anything with that. So the thing is, though, is how much, was Kennedy going to give the resistance? How much resistance was he going to give him? Because we know that does not include anything involving advisors anymore. It definitely.
Can I cut you off just for a second?
Sure.
Because I wanted to comment on saying, going back to what you said, John said, oh, due respect to John, but I don't know that that's relevant. What a war planner can read into whatever in the context of what we're talking about here. Do you kind of follow what I mean?
Well, I mean, the policies withdraw. So that should be the focus, should be to withdraw the advisors.
Right. But I mean, when he says that Bundy changed it because Johnson told him to change it, that's after the fact, John. That's after Kennedy's dead. That's after the original draft was signed.
So
that's a misdirection. Who cares?
The original draft of 273. Let me ask you this: the original draft of 273 was way too aggressive for Kennedy to sign. Is that correct? Kennedy would, in your opinion, Kennedy would have never signed 273 in its original version. Never mind the change in that final paragraph.
Yeah.
And not only wouldn't he have signed it, Sean, I think it would have pissed him off, right? I mean, he would have come back and said, this is not our policy. And I think could there have been more firings? Like, who knows what could have happened if he wasn't killed. So, clearly this was done with knowledge that this is not going to be the president who signs this document.
Well,
I agree with you.
Clearly what Kennedy wanted, though, was to hand this completely over to the Vietnamese. And this was going to be their war. They were going to do this. So, some people are going to say when they read 273 is that's what Kennedy was doing. He was basically saying, this is how we have to give this resistance, or give them at least, motivation to continue the resistance. But I agree with you. It is aggressive.
Are you talking about paragraph 7?
Well, no, I'm talking about I've heard people in the original form. You forget about that paragraph 7. It was originally written that they would say, well, Kennedy didn't want the resistance to totally fall apart, and he did want the motivation to still be there for them to continue on without American involvement at all. And that's the key. He wanted this completely controlled by South Vietnam, the Vietnamese, whatever you want to call it, the resistance, and they take over the war completely. But the people would say that Kennedy didn't want it to completely fall apart.
But I guess what I'm struggling with is these are official government documents, right? Right. NSAM 263. And again, that even trumps an executive order. People a lot of times don't realize that a National Security Action Memorandum is the highest document that a president can sign because of the key words national security.
Yeah.
Right? Constitutionally, it trumps everything. Now, it can be challenged later by a court. It could get challenged at some point, but it can be pretty much immediately implemented because a perceived clear and present danger or whatnot, right? It's a national security issue. So 263 is a serious document that didn't happen overnight on a whim, where the draft of 273 is not a serious document that did happen overnight on a whim. Okay. The reason I say that is because they just went, Kennedy sent Krulak and Mendenhall and McNamara and Taylor and had these 2 huge reports done.
Right.
and then wrote an official document, the highest document he can write, to change and cement U.S. policy.
Right.
And then 273 is written the day before. And what I'm saying is to imply that Kennedy, anything in relation to 273 is unsupported assertion. I mean, it's just, it's such supposition, because how come? Kennedy never saw NSAM 273.
Right.
The draft or otherwise. Kennedy never talked to anybody who attended to the Honolulu conference.
Right.
Kennedy never had a discussion with, I mean, unless somebody called him that night, maybe, I mean, look, it's conceivable that somebody called him that had been there and they had a talk on the phone, but come on, you know, substantial enough where he's going to reverse what he just did because on their say so? The people he mistrusted enough to go around?
Yeah, okay.
NSAM 263? And now he's just going to say, I'm not buying it.
Greg, another thing is paragraph 4, I believe it was,
Yes.
where you talked about, and you mentioned this on a panel episode, where you feel that, you know, that paragraph there, could that be talking about anything other than, it doesn't make sense, I think is the words you said.
Yeah.
Oh, unless you're talking about the assassination.
Yeah.
Now, let me ask you this. Could that possibly be referring to the withdrawal policy in the sense that, you know, Kennedy had to realize that everybody around him is against the withdrawal policy, basically.
Mm-hmm. So,
you know, maybe Bundy needed to convince everybody in the administration, if we're to assume that Bundy is loyal to Kennedy.
Mm-hmm.
It's an assumption that, you know, I'm on the fence about, but but if he's loyal to Kennedy, could that be about, you know, getting the administration to back the withdrawal policy? Or do you think, no, that doesn't make sense either?
On paragraph 4?
Paragraph 4.
Yeah. So no, I don't think it makes sense. Here's the reason why. Okay. So let's go back to what you were saying earlier about the plane, right? Mcgeorge Bundy calling the plane the state. Yes. I call it the State Department plane. It really wasn't. It's in the fleet of Air Force 1 and 2, right? The State Department uses a similar plane, right? So the cabinet, many members of the cabinet were en route to Tokyo for an economic summit on November 22nd, right? We're talking about Friedman. We're talking about the Secretary of the Interior. We're talking about the Secretary of Agriculture, Commerce, okay? And several others, okay? In other words, people who virtually have nothing to do with Vietnam.
Right. Okay.
Zero. Nothing to do with Vietnam policy. Nothing. None of it. Okay. So this is really key, in my opinion. This is a really important point. The only thing that I don't know, well, there's a lot I don't know, but in this regard, the only thing that I don't know is if the cabinet members on this plane going to Tokyo were given the draft. We know the draft of NSAM 273 was circulated widely in the government, including on that plane. Okay. We know that. Now, how it got on the plane, I don't know. I don't know. Did they teletype it up? I don't know. But they had it. Okay. I don't know if they got it prior to the call that said the president's dead, or if they got it right afterwards. Okay. It almost doesn't matter, but it kind of does a little. I'd like to know the answer, but it still doesn't. It's not necessary to know the answer, but it's really important to notice they happened really close to each other, right? Because they're on an airplane. There's no escape from this. You can't escape these documents that are handed to you, and you can't escape the fact that the president's been shot that you've just been told. So these are both happening kind of simultaneous. Keep in mind, on the plane, all of these cabinet members know who the president is. It's John F. Kennedy. We also know that they're not privy at all. Any of them, none of them are privy to the top secret classified conference minutes, notes, or discussions that took place at the Honolulu conference the day before. This is really important. Let me repeat that again. Nobody on the State Department plane, none of the cabinet members have a need to know or have a classification sufficiently high enough to be in the know about any Vietnam discussions, policies, policy changes, any of that, unless it's made public by the president or it's made public by the media somehow. But none of this has happened. This is a day old. This hasn't happened at all, right? It's not even 24 hours old.
Right.
So they're in the plane on their way, and they're handed this. Okay. Now, if they're handed this before they get the news that Kennedy is killed, okay, let me read paragraph 4.
Go ahead.
Now, again, I want you to remember, pretend for a second that you're the Secretary of the Interior. And you're the Secretary of Agriculture, who were both handed this document. You got nothing to do with Vietnam. And you're reading it. And it's saying all this stuff. It's saying, well, here, I'll read the first couple. Here's the first paragraph, smoking gun. The first 2 words are a lie. It remains. Really? It remains the central object of the United States and South Vietnam to assist the people and government of that country to win their contest against the externally directed, supported communist conspiracy. No, that's a lie. The central object of the United States and South Vietnam is draw by 1965, the end of 1965. That was the central object. So the very first paragraph is a lie. And why are you giving this to you, the Secretary of Agriculture, or the Secretary of Commerce, or the Secretary of Interior? Why do you need to know this? They must have been shaking their heads going, okay, is this for somebody else? Are you sure I'm supposed to have this? It says classified on it, Okay.
So Greg, let
me keep.
Okay, keep going. Then I have a question for you.
The objectives of the United States with respect to the withdrawal of U.S. military personnel remain as stated in the White House statement of October 2nd, 1963. Okay, so now we've got it ambiguous now. Now they're saying the objective of the United States with respect to withdrawal is there, but our central object is to assist them to win their contest against the communists. Okay, 3. We'll skip 3 because it doesn't matter. 4 is the one we were talking about. Paragraph 4. Okay. Yes. Again, Secretary of Agriculture, Secretary of Commerce, you have no idea what went on at the conference. You weren't there, and you have no interest in Vietnam.
Right.
Why would they have to have this knowledge? It is of the highest importance that and the president has not been assassinated. We don't think. We don't know yet. But if they got this first, Kennedy hasn't quite been assassinated yet.
Well, originally when that's written, though, it was written on the 21st, so he wasn't assassinated. Paragraph 4 was written on the that was written on the 20th.
I'm saying, but when they got it on the plane, on the 22nd, see, they got it on the 22nd on the plane. We don't know if they got the news that he was assassinated first or they got this document first.
Right. Okay.
See what I mean? Not sure. I'm not sure. I might be able to figure it out, but I haven't figured it out yet. But it almost doesn't matter. Okay. If it's before he's assassinated, they think this is coming from the Kennedy White House, paragraph 4. So keep that in mind.
Right.
It is of the highest importance that the United States government avoid either the appearance or the reality of public recrimination from one part of it against another, and the president expressed that all senior officers of the government will take energetic steps to ensure that they and their subordinates go out of their way to maintain and to defend the unity of the United States government both here and in the field. End of the paragraph. Now, the problem with this is you're the Secretary of the Interior, you're the Secretary of Commerce, and you're not involved in Vietnam. So what are they talking about to you? What could they be referring to you? It says nothing about Vietnam in that paragraph.
No, nothing.
Now, however, if you got this after you just found out Kennedy's brains were blown out, and you read that, now it has a different meaning.
Right.
Now it means don't blame each other for the killing of the president. Now it means looks like there's going to be a coup d'etat to me.
Wow.
I mean, that's how it reads to me.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Billy.
So, okay. So I guess, I don't know if this matters, but they know Kennedy's policy on Vietnam. Even if they're not involved directly with it, they still know his policy is to pull out of Vietnam. Okay.
NSAM 263 was top secret. It didn't get declassified for a couple decades.
So they didn't know the policy then. They didn't know the policy. Okay.
They didn't know. They did not know the existence of NSAM 263.
Gotcha.
They did know the Stars and Stripes and the New York Times published the withdrawal of the first 1,000 troops by the end of the year.
Right.
But it was not in the context of a complete withdrawal.
Okay.
It was more in the context of a troop rotation.
So they, depending on whether they got this before or after, it's their.
It's weird either way, in my view.
Yeah,
it is.
Well,
weird.
they don't know. They don't know Kennedy's policy. They certainly don't know Johnson's policy.
Right. And they certainly weren't classified to know what's in this document.
Right.
See, why were they even given this document?
Why were they getting it? Yeah.
Why were they getting this document?
Question.
And in my view, the reason they were given this document was for paragraph 4.
Right.
That's the whole reason they were given this.
Wow.
Right. Because, and again, I mentioned this on the show last time, and I know, I'm getting into an area where, I'm not an expert here, I'm not a psychologist, but I did my studying throughout my life. And that when traumatic events happen, right, a lot of things that happen around the traumatic event get mushed together. It gets muddy. You're right. Even your memory will get a little bit muddy. You'll kind of marry things together, etc. So, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised at all that as these people that were in the plane read this, that, even a week later after the fact, when they're back in Washington, D.C., whenever there was any whisper of, do you think the CIA did it? Or do you think the FBI knew it? Or do you think the Secret Service? See, these people were done what? They were given an instruction in this. For all they know, it came from the Kennedy White House because it had nothing to do with Vietnam.
Right.
Right. Avoid the appearance of the reality of public recrimination from one part of it against another. And the president expects all the senior officers of the government will take energetic steps to ensure that they and their subordinates go out of their way to maintain and defend the unity of the United States government, both here and in the field, because the king is dead.
Right.
I mean, that's how you end that paragraph.
And we would like to thank our sponsor, Gracious Day Grains. Sean, you like to eat healthy, don't you?
Always, buddy. I try to eat healthy as much as I can.
Yeah, and there is nothing healthier than what they call like farm to table, right? So when you can get something right from the ground and make it and then put it right on your table. And Gracious Day Grains, they have a tremendous selection, and it's totally organic. Everything is, they don't use any sort of herbicides or pesticides or anything like that. They have a bunch of different products on their website, Gracious Day Grains. So if you go to graciousdaymilling.com, you'll find a bunch of great stuff there, Sean.
Yeah, you will, Billy. And it's owned by Tom Maxey, who's a great guy from Virginia. He's a truth seeker, just like me and you, buddy. And Tom's growing philosophy follows the wisdom of farmers of centuries past. And a quote from Tom is, if we practice the right rotations, we exclude the bugs and weeds without needing herbicides or pesticides. So, I mean, this is great, Billy. I mean, what he's doing is fantastic.
There's cornbread mix, there's cornmeal, popcorn he sells, buckwheat Sean, have you had buckwheat pancakes?
No, buddy.
Oh my, they're delicious. I love buckwheat pancakes. And Gracious Day Grains sells buckwheat pancakes. Just go to their website and you'll be able to find all of this stuff there. You can order it right off the website. You can find out all about how they farm and their whole philosophy, Tom's philosophy. It's great stuff.
It really is, Billy. And one of the things he does is he grinds small batches at very low temperatures, which retains the flavor and the freshness.
Of course. And it can't get any fresher than that. I mean, it's literally right from the ground. So again, go to graciousdaymilling.com and just, take a look on there. You can order whatever you want and they'll send it right to your door. Again, it doesn't get any fresher than that, right from Tom's farm to your door, to your table. So
absolutely. And eat healthy and you'll feel better.
Absolutely. I wish I could do that. I wish I could eat healthier, Sean.
We'll start with Tom's stuff, buddy.
I'm going to order some of those buckwheat pancakes. I love
There you go. I'm going to try them too, Billy.
Yeah, they're really good. All right. Gracious Day. We thank Gracious Day Grains for their sponsorship.
Thank you. Wow.
Wow.
I mean, does that make sense to you guys too?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just want to point out, Greg, one thing, the late great Vince Scalandria, who
Yeah.
I think did a lot of great work on this. He always believed that McGeorge Bundy was a key player in the assassination. And in fact, when Leno Sanik did his 50 Reasons for 50 Years,
Mm-hmm.
he had somebody, I forget who the researcher was, but he had him read a statement from Scalandria at the end there, where he talked about Bundy in detail,
Mm-hmm.
about
Mm-hmm.
how he feels that Bundy was a key player in this
Mm-hmm.
thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you have to at least leave the door open to the
Mm-hmm.
possibility that he had pre-knowledge. I mean, you can't close
Mm-hmm.
the door with the information that we have. I think that's
Mm-hmm.
the way I feel. I don't know, Bill, what do you think about that?
Well, so I mean, are we saying because John was, because he knew Bundy
Well, I
and
don't want to
spoke with,
speak for John. I mean, he gave his point. Like John, in John's opinion, he said that he talked to Bundy, and John puts a lot of stock into the change in that final paragraph, which, to be honest, Greg, a lot of researchers do.
I know.
Researchers, I mean, we're probably, if I'm on the fence about it, but I'm leaving that door open to Bundy. You said that you believe he's involved, but we're kind of in the minority, because the people that I talked to, a lot of them closed the door on Bundy, to be honest with you, and they don't feel that he was involved. But I think, you got to go back to Vince Scalandria, who I think he was a tremendous asset to
Oh yeah.
on this, and
Yeah.
he really felt that Bundy was a key player.
Yeah. Be honest with you, I do too. For me personally, I have no doubt. I have no doubt. I mean, it even goes back farther than that. I mean, even if you go to the Bay of Pigs, this is important history too, right? So on the last standing order that Kennedy gave the night before the Bay of Pigs, last standing order was all of Castro's Air Force must be destroyed while it's on the ground, or you're to scrub the Bay of Pigs invasion plan. That was his last order. So there was a pre-dawn airstrike that was supposed to be launched from Nicaragua to take out all of the planes. Right now, if you recall, a week before that, they had already sent in some planes to take out Castro's Air Force, and they got almost all of them. But they got caught in the process, and they landed the plane that had been dressed up as a Cuban rebel type of a aircraft or whatever. I'm sorry, as a Cuban aircraft, and they had the pilot, who was a Cuban pilot, land in the United States, basically pretending that he blew up the Castro Air Force and it came from internally. Well, the problem with that was the markings were wrong on the plane for the Cuban Air Force. The cockpit was the area of the below the front nose should have been opaque and it was see-through, or vice versa. I don't remember which, but in other words, there was a couple of key things that immediately showed that it was the United States that did it, and it wasn't a Cuban uprising, right? So we got caught red-handed doing that, and Adlai Stevenson denied vehemently at the United Nations that we had anything to do with it. And then he got embarrassed really bad when they showed the pictures and the proof that we had done it. So now Adlai Stevenson was very upset, right? He was our ambassador to the United Nations. So a week later now, we're getting ready to do the actual invasion of the Bay of Pigs, and Adlai Stevenson finds out and is all freaked out because he just got burned a week earlier. So he contacts Mcgeorge Bundy and he says to Bundy, look, and he goes through this whole thing, right? So Bundy calls up General Cabell and tells him that they have to delay the airstrikes until after a beachhead has been captured and possibly even an airfield established along the beach. This was never in the plan. That was never a requirement. What was required was that there be a second airstrike that came in a first airstrike that comes in the morning and takes out, because Castro had a couple of Sea Furies and he had a couple of T-33, they call them trainers, right? But he had very few, like maybe a half a dozen. I mean, it wasn't very many aircraft left at all. Okay. But these T-33s are very maneuverable. They call them trainers, but they're jets, right? They're going to shoot down, what we're using, B-26. I think B-26s, I think is what they were using. I'm not sure. But anyway, they can outmaneuver those, right? So Kennedy's last standing order was you have to do a pre-dawn airstrike and take out the remainder of those or it's off.
Right. And I talked to Lisa Pease about that because a lot of researchers don't talk about that, or they say the opposite of that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not, that's what he did. So Mcgeorge Bundy is the one who canceled the pre-dawn airstrike. So we're talking about fingerprints and stuff. Bundy, without Kennedy's knowledge, canceled the pre-dawn airstrike. When you read the report of the study group on the Bay of Pigs, it says right in it the immediate cause of failure was the cancellation of that airstrike. Now, the CIA did a great job in muddying that up and pretending like Kennedy canceled not that strike, but a subsequent strike from the USS Essex later in the day. Well, that was never part of the plan, ever. But this whole mess started because Bundy. Now, Bundy gave himself cover because he claimed that Adlai Stevenson was upset. Well, when does Adlai Stevenson become the commander-in-chief?
Right.
When did that happen?
Yeah.
You know, when did Bundy become the commander-in-chief? See, so the Bay of Pigs failed because of McGeorge Bundy. And McGeorge Bundy offered his resignation letter to Kennedy immediately following the Bay of Pigs. I've got a copy of it. And Kennedy saved it. He didn't use it, but he saved it.
Yeah.
You know, so I mean, that's a bit of an admission of, you know, consciousness of guilt, maybe. You know,
I think it's so important because the Bay of Pigs, Kennedy realizes, you know, how deceptive people around him were with that. I think that's when Kennedy really started to mistrust a lot of the people around him, and really, you know, would only trust probably Bobby would probably be his main advisor on almost everything after this.
Yeah. That's why he put him in charge, basically, of the CIA. I mean, he was like he's like a watchdog over him.
Exactly.
But as I've said, Sean, I think by that point it was too late.
Sure. But Greg, this has been fantastic. I mean, we've covered just about, you know, everything I wanted to cover. I know we're here a long time, but do you want to just the last thing I want to, and maybe don't go into too much detail because maybe you could come back and talk about more on this, but I do want to mention you had a relationship with Jerry Patrick Hemming, who's a fascinating character, fascinating. And Bill, I don't know if you're familiar with Hemming, but is very, would you describe him as a mercenary, Greg? Is that a good way to describe him? Or
no, I describe him as a hyper patriot.
Okay.
Believe it or not, hyper patriot. I won't say that he never acted as a mercenary, but it was always in the context of being a patriot. So, as odd as that sounds, he was widely misunderstood. I'll say that he was wildly misunderstood.
And he was also, I mean, a lot of guys like him that are in that field, like, I mean, it's hard to pin down on a lot of things they say, though.
Yeah.
You know, it really is, like the Frank Sturgis types, people like that. It's really hard. I know Gate and Fonzie had a lot of trouble, you know, because they want to misdirect at what they do. But you had you say you had a pretty good relationship with Hemming.
Yeah, I did. I've got dozens and dozens of hours of recorded conversations that I have to eventually digitize.
Do you feel you don't have to answer the question if you don't want to, but do you feel Hemming had anything to do with the assassination or no?
I do not. Okay. Which is interesting because I went into it when the first time I ever talked to him on the phone. I went into it like a prosecuting attorney cross-examining a hostile witness. Okay. I was, because I figured I'm going to shake the tree as hard as I can and see what falls out, you know? And after a number of years of, you know, this process, let's just say, I ended up realizing that I had fallen into the trap of, you know, falling in love with one of my own pet theories. Let's just put it that way. And now I'm overstating that because I didn't really have a pet theory about him, but I was pretty darn convinced. You know, I had read Alan Weberman's, A.J. Weberman and I forget his writing partner on it, Cadwell or something like that.
Well,
Anyway,
is that coup d'etat? Is that coup
yeah,
d'etat?
yeah,
Yeah,
Taking of America 1, 2, 3 or something. Yeah. And I, there was a lot of information in there, but so yeah, so I think Hemming and his group were alternate patsies. And there was an assassination being set up in Miami, as you are aware of,
Yes.
earlier.
Sure.
And he was involved in presidential security. So it's kind of an interesting twist, right? Right. So again, we were talking about relaxing presidential security, or, the elite guard, in order to accommodate an assassination. So why would you bring Hemming and a group of Interpen people in to supplement the Secret Service? A little odd, right?
Can you explain the Interpen for listeners who don't know what Interpen was?
Yeah. So Interpen stands for Intercontinental Penetration Force. So it was the brainchild of both Jerry Patrick Hemming and James Jesus Ankleton.
Right.
So basically it was, this is going to sound silly. I almost don't want to say it, but, the IMF force, Mission Impossible Force, right? That's kind of on the order of that, right? That this is stuff that the U.S. government sometimes wants done, but can't do, or is so risky that they're willing to let you try to do it, and you'll get paid for it, but you're going to be disavowed. It's you're not in any knock list anywhere, So so they did a lot of stuff. A lot of it we wouldn't approve of. A lot of it he was not proud of a lot of what had happened.
Right.
But he was able to put a lot of it into the context of where he was coming from at the time of being given the assignments.
Right.
You know what I mean? Which I found to be credible. I didn't, we talked for probably 10 years. I mean, every couple days on the phone for probably 10 years. I mean, and he got relaxed enough with me that I have no reason to believe that he still felt like I was going to try to stick it to him, or take his words and twist them and turn them into something that he wasn't, or whatever. But he wasn't, he never claimed to be a saint by any means. He told me stuff that he did that were, you'd consider pretty much atrocities, commissioned to do it, though, right or wrong. I'm just saying that he wasn't a killer gone renegade type of a thing.
Sure.
Do you know what I'm saying? These were targeted threats to our national security, as far as he was informed. Sometimes it turned out later that wasn't the case, and he didn't. But he was very rough around the edges, to be sure.
Would you say this statement is correct? That he had no love for Kennedy and probably hated him?
No, that's incorrect.
That's incorrect. Okay.
That's incorrect. Yeah, it's incorrect.
Okay. How would you describe how he felt about Kennedy?
So Jerry broke down and cried on the phone with me when we were talking about this subject. Now, that is a remarkable statement, just so you know. It would be like saying John Wayne broke down and cried.
Yeah.
And when I'm saying cried, I mean like almost wept.
Right.
Cried.
Wow.
Not a little cry.
Wow. Yeah.
And he was saying almost at the top of his lungs, because I was basically asking this question and pushing him hard on it. And he said that as far as he and his group were concerned, the Kennedy brothers, so he was talking about Bobby too, were their last best hope. And what he meant by that was, because the world was the way it was during the Cold War, we had a choice of going to hot war and nuclear annihilation, or doing unconventional warfare Those were the two choices, because you're not going to get to a situation of peace. That was his belief. He said, we might like to think that, we might want to believe all that, he is, but it's a bunch of BS. That was his attitude towards it, because that's just not human nature. It never has been. In the entire times humans have been on this planet, they've been fighting each other, and there's never been a time when it hasn't been that way. He goes, so we can get into relationships with other countries, and you can get that. You get into especially a trade relationship with other countries, and you can kind of calm all that down. But whichever way the wind blows, before you know it, you've got a conflict with somebody else, and you've got a conflict with somebody else. He goes, we were under the impression at the height of the Cold War, in the early 60s, that without people like those in Interpen and similar groups, that we would end up in a nuclear exchange. In other words, that we had to, there are things that we have to do to other countries that you can't do in the open, but if they're not done, it will end up leading to. Now, I'm not saying that he was correct. I'm not justifying anything that he did, but this is what his belief was. And he wasn't a Kennedy admirer like I am. It was for different reasons that he thought that Kennedy was, our last best hope, for completely different reasons, but not. He definitely didn't hate Kennedy. That's
okay.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with the confidential correspondence group? It was mentioned, and John Newman mentioned it in Devils in the Detail, the book he did with Alan Dale, I believe.
Yeah, I've got it here.
He mentions
I
that,
don't remember.
the confidential, I believe it's under the Office of Security, but it was basically, very like deep cover CIA that to basically what you talked about with the IMF reference. The government wants to just dissolve all, involvement whatsoever. And these guys are off the books completely, but they're technically, under this confidential correspondence group. So I was wondering if Interpen, because Hemming always said that he'd never worked for the CIA, right?
Right. But he told me on the phone that he was a singleton.
Okay.
So, yeah, right.
Yeah.
So, he was a singleton.
I wonder if something like Interpen would fall under the confidential correspondence group, which would go under the Office of Security, which is just interesting.
Yeah. He introduced Lee Harvey Oswald to James Jesus Angleton.
Say that again?
Hemming introduced Lee Harvey Oswald to James Jesus Angleton.
Wow. When was this?
I'd have to look at my notes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Sean,
sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just gonna say, Sean, I think that could be an episode.
Yeah, we could go, Greg. I mean, we'll have to have you back, because Hemming could be an episode on his own. That's just fascinating, because I mean, you think about, we know Angleton was aware of Oswald. They were controlling his files under the Office of Security. So the date that he actually introduced them to, that's crucial. I mean, that's
that's I'm trying to remember where it was.
I think if you're willing to, Greg, come back and we'll talk about that, because I think this, like Bill said, that's an episode on its own.
Yeah, I'll be real honest with you on this, and I'm not real proud of it. After Hemming died, I'll be honest with you, it hit me kind of hard, because we had actually become friends, and it's so counterintuitive to say. I sometimes I can't believe that I'm saying it myself. You know what I mean? He was extremely rough around the edges. Right. Every other word was F this, F that, but the guy was encyclopedic. I mean, beyond belief. People have called me that before. No. You haven't talked to Jerry Hemming. This guy, I'm telling you, he had nearly photographic memory practically. I mean, it was unbelievable recall, just fascinating. So it was a real loss to me when he died, to be honest with you. And I took the tapes and I put them away, and I digitized some of them, and then I just stopped, because it was bringing me down some, and I was and I know that I feel like I have a responsibility kind of to history and to this, to do more with it, But I just have had trouble doing it for some reason. I'm not exactly, it's just kind of personal, you know, it's
Yeah,
kind of personal.
I understand.
And yeah,
Fascinating stuff,
you know,
though. That's really
now, just so you know, there's nothing really enlightening about him in the sense of, you know, he's not going to say who did it because he didn't know, you know, he's not going
right.
to say he did it because he didn't do it, you know, he's not,
Right.
you know what I mean? There's a lot that he doesn't say that if he had, I would jump right out and say. But like this, I don't think I've ever said before that he's the person who introduced Oswald to
Wow.
Angleton, you know. Um, you know, he's also the one who told me that he met with Oswald right after Oswald had met with Bobby Kennedy. So that's another tidbit that
And Oswald met with Bobby Kennedy.
yeah, that's been out there for a while.
What would be the motivation of someone like Angleton to want to meet Oswald? Consider, you know, assuming that you assume that he's controlling he's controlling Oswald as
Yeah.
you know, an asset, using him against the communists. What would be, because you know that the CIA always has plausible deniability. They want to keep that distance. What would be the
Yeah.
motivation for Angleton to meet Oswald?
Well, Angleton was not in charge of go get the communists. He was in charge of counterintelligence.
Right, and he was in
So
too, looking for mole.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's
He was
what
looking for
Oswald, you know, assuming that he was using Oswald to weed out moles.
like a mole hunter.
A mole
Right.
hunter, exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
That's how Angleton was a mole hunter, and he was dangling Oswald out there.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, he was dangling Oswald
What would
out
be
there.
his motivation to meet him face to face, though?
That I don't know. That's interesting. I don't know.
Also interesting because it's also out there to David Atlee Phillips.
Yeah.
And that's come under question. John Newman's done work on that, under, you know, with Vesiana coming under question whether that happened. But again, you know, that's interesting that because that was shortly before the assassination that Vesiana claimed Phillips met face to face with Oswald.
Yeah. I don't know.
Fascinating.
Sometimes Jerry would put things out there, and then it was almost like he was concerned that he was going to say too much.
Right.
And so then he'd start to go off on a tangent. And then once he did that, it was like you were reading out of Encyclopedia Britannica.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's like, but that wasn't my question was. My question was.
That's what I meant before, Greg, when I said it's so hard to pin down guys like Hemming or what they're saying, because these guys are brilliant. I mean, these guys are very smart.
Yeah.
All these guys. And that's one thing. I mean, they're, you know, these guys are really, really intelligent. Well, Greg, we kept you a long time here. I didn't mean to go this much, but this was fantastic, and hopefully
great.
This was great. Bill, anything that you did?
No, we would love to have you back, Greg, if you could at some point. This was great episode. I really enjoyed it. I really did, and I think our listeners are really going to get a tremendous. This is just going to be a tremendous episode. I really feel that this was great. It's just so much information, and boy, that last revelation I think is going to blow some people away. I really do. Amazing. Yeah.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it, and I'll. You put so much time into this and effort into it, and it's just hard to see where the end to it is. It's sometimes I've kind of come to the conclusion that this is just something that's going to go on for the rest of my life, and it is what it is, and it's almost like having to deal with cancer or something. It's just
right. I think it's important, though, to get that information that we got out earlier on Vietnam, because this is where we talk about academia failed, Hollywood failed, and media failed on Kennedy's real policy on Vietnam and how it was reversed. And I think it's important that the young people understand, and we have to understand the history, and the false history is not what we should be teaching.
Yeah. Oh, I agree.
And Greg, you're doing a great service by doing this, by keeping it going, and by keeping the conversation going. I believe that, because there are so many people who would just assume, forget it, ancient history. Why do we need to know this? But it's so important. Really.
Oh, it's so important. It's, here's where I have to tread softly sometimes, because for me, what we see today started back then.
Oh, we agree.
Absolutely. No question about it.
You know,
Yep.
and the problem is that people get confused by their political party affiliation or their political identity as conservative or liberal,
Right.
or by all these distractions. And they don't realize that they're playing into the plan of the, how should we call them? Proudy used to call them the high cabal,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
The gentry, the
Secret team, right?
the elite, right?
It's,
And what people don't seem to realize is that I'm going to call them the masters. I know, I'm sounding like some nutcase. I don't even care. The masters, for lack of a better
what
word,
it is.
are using each political party depending on convenience and depending on the narrative.
Yep.
And so right now, they're using one political party more than the other one, and they always do. And next time, it'll be the other political party more than the one they're using now.
Yep.
And people need to know that. And it's like, if you go back to the Kennedy stuff, it's easy to see because hindsight's 2020. So, and I mean, they muddied it all up. So we had to get all this crappy mud out of the way so we could start seeing it more 2020, right? But we need to see this today, what's going on. It's like the same machination that decided it had no choice but to remove the president of the United States by assassination is the same establishment that said we have to remove a president of the United States by Watergate. If you read Silent Coup, don't get me wrong, I'm no Nixon fan.
Me either.
But how that happened,
right?
The process is all important. The process is important.
Right.
What's going on today in our politics, and it's a shame that even as I sit here, I have to bite my tongue to not say the wrong thing politically and have your audience go, oh, well, I liked him up till there.
Right. Sure.
But he either likes this person or he likes that person. I'm not talking about who I like. I'm talking about the process that's going on in our country. The process that's going on in our country. And so today, we're not in the 60s anymore. And so they're not using bullets so much. See? But there's other ways. They have very, very, very sophisticated and effective ways to control the politics, you know? And we need to get our heads out of our backsides and realize that that's what's going on, that this has nothing to do with you being Democrat. This has nothing to do with you being Republican. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with something else completely. And, you know, I tell you what, the people who killed Kennedy didn't care that he was a Democrat, right?
Right.
I mean, he was a conservative Democrat, if you really want to.
Right. Sure he was.
He was a conservative Democrat, you know, which doesn't exist today, doesn't seem like, just like there's no liberal Republicans, you know, but that used to be okay. It used to be okay to be on the conservative side of the Democrat Party, and it used to be okay to be on the liberal side of the Republican Party, you know, but now that's all, it's really divided big time in a not good way. So the thing for me, you know, when people find out what I do, or they ask questions, you know, one of the first things they always want to say is, so who did it? Right? Don't you get that? So who
we
did
get it all the time.
So,
all the time. All the time.
The irrelevant question of all isn't who did it. What's relevant is we know who didn't do it. Oswald didn't do it.
Right.
And what's relevant is they made us believe, or attempted, and to this day are continuing to attempt that. Okay. That's what's relevant.
Right. And why it was done.
Yes.
Why it was done.
Yes.
Right. Great point.
Yes. Like the Proudy character said in JFK, right?
Right.
Why was Kennedy killed? Who benefited? Who had the power to cover it up?
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, the three key questions.
Yep.
Great point, Greg.
All right, Greg. Well, this was, again, fantastic. Thank you so much. We
You're
really
welcome.
appreciate it. All right, Sean. Great episode.
Fantastic. This was fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, if you like,
I had a great time.
Please rate, review, subscribe, and comment. All right. That's enough out of you.
All right. Good night, everybody.
That's
That's Enough Out of You podcast is executive produced and written by Bill Rader and Sean Kane, and edited by Bill Rader. The That's Enough Out of You podcast and logo are exclusive property of Bags of Chicken, LLC. Any rebroadcast, retransmission, or accounts of this podcast without the express written consent of Bags of Chicken, LLC is prohibited. So don't even try it.